What's up, guys? I'm going to delve into Exanima Expert Arena and talk a little bit about the basics of combat and some of the potential I feel this game has. The game is currently in early development. We have Novice Arena, Expert Arena, and Story Mode, all of which are pretty basic right now. There's not a lot of content in this game. I should point out as well that my opponents are AI. There is currently no PvP in Exanima. However, the developers have stated that they plan on implementing PvP. So I feel like this game definitely has some potential for one-on-one player versus player combat. And I wanted to showcase the combat system for you guys. The first thing to note is that momentum plays an enormous factor in the game. The harder you swing, the more damage you're going to inflict on your opponent. Now, simultaneously, if you take a huge swing at your opponent and you whiff, you're going to leave yourself exposed, most likely, especially if you're using a huge weapon like I currently am. You'll notice throughout the video, me hitting nothing but air, my character kind of stumbles around a little bit. I lose my balance. The weight of the weapon is, throwing me off kilter a little bit, and it takes me a little while to recover. At which point, my opponent can easily punish me with a counterattack. So it's a pretty interesting risk versus reward system right off the bat. Another thing to point out is that you'll notice that my cursor is generally... Oh my god, that was a huge hit. There's an example of momentum playing a big role. Momentum specifically connecting with the side of my opponent's face. Oh yeah, and once you defeat an opponent in the arena, you can loot their body and take their weapons, their armor. Better prepare yourself for the next fight. So, what was I saying? The cursor. You'll notice that my cursor is generally in between myself and my opponent. That's for a few different reasons. The first is because your player character will face in the direction of the cursor. Second, your player character will also block based on the direction of the cursor. So if your opponent is swinging at your right leg, you need to have your cursor at a point to intersect that swing at your right leg. Now, finally, attacks are also directional based. So if I want to swing from left to right, I need to drop my cursor to my character's left and finish my swing on the right-hand side. Pretty interesting stuff. Now, the movement is the basic A, S, W, and D keys. However, in this game, movement is universal. I guess maybe that's the best way I can think of to describe it. So, if I hit the D key, that's always going to move my character to my character's right. Now, it's really easy to get mixed up because of that. Oh man, that opponent... She is such a bitch. Like, that opponent absolutely thrashes me more often than not. As you can see, I could barely get an attack in, and she was just parrying me and just counterattacking left and right. Just couldn't do anything. But okay, the movement can be kind of tricky. In order to attack, it's a simple click of the mouse. Clicking and holding will swing your weapon laterally. Double clicking and holding will do an overhead attack. And interestingly, clicking and releasing prematurely will result in a feint. You may have noticed me throwing out quite a bit of feints. I'm all about that, man. I love when games allow you to feint attacks. It adds so much depth to the combat. So, basically the idea is to feint one direction, get your opponent to put his guard up in that direction, and then boom, hit him where he's vulnerable. So, while the combat system is very basic and easy to understand, the learning curve is very significant, and that's partly because of the pace of the game and the momentum, the physics of the game. The heavier your weapon, obviously, the more it's going to affect your character's recovery time if you're taking those huge swings. Now, if I take a swing moving forward and I move my cursor in a certain direction to create a huge amount of torque, it's probably going to result in my character losing balance, especially if my hit doesn't connect. So you kind of have to pick and choose your swings. I'm not a good example of being conservative with my swings, especially when I'm using a huge two-handed weapon. I like to put as much torque behind my swings as possible, because when you're able to connect, it just feels so damn satisfying. Now, you may have noticed that last opponent was wearing some pretty nice looking plate armor. The fashion in this game really surprised me, especially after going through the novice arena. And now, before I get into the fashion, let me talk about why I chose the expert arena over the novice arena, first of all. It's not because, expert is more difficult and more impressive. In my opinion, it's really not. I feel that novice is more difficult overall. And let me explain why. In expert arena, you get access to quite a wide variety of plate armor, which greatly bolsters your defense against physical attacks. You may have picked up on this. My health bar, which is the yellow bar at the bottom left of the screen, sometimes will turn dark brown or red when I take damage. Dark brown means that I can regenerate that health over time. Dark red means that that's permanent damage, and that will not regenerate for the next fight. So if I was able to advance right now, I would be going into the next fight with less than 100% HP. So in Novice Arena, where you don't have access to all that awesome plate armor, taking a hit or two is devastating and will most likely result in permanent damage. And I'm pretty sure I just hit her with the shaft of the axe there, and it was probably at a time when she was off balance, so it just completely flung her on her ass, and I was able to finish her off before she could stand up. That's awesome. Because of the plate armor that you have access to in Expert Arena, it actually makes things easier in terms of progressing to the end. Expert, as far as I can tell, has no bearing on the difficulty of the AI or anything like that. It's just strictly a beefier and wider variety of deadly weapons and significant armor. Now, that being said, there is a weight stat to armor, and I don't think that it's actually working right now. I feel every bit as nimble wearing a full set of plate as I do wearing no armor whatsoever. Now, that could just be that I'm not picking up on something, or it could be that the difference is very minor, but that's how it feels to me right now. I would love it if wearing a light set of armor was viable in this game and would actually give you a significant speed and agility bonus against someone who's decked out in a full set of plate armor. Because right now it feels like there's no reason to not have a full set of plate armor on because of the defenses you gain from it. And another interesting thing that I would like to point out is, even though it doesn't pertain to Expert Arena, I have read that the developers are going to add magic into the game. So that could be awesome. Who knows what the hell is going to happen there? I wonder if you can make a mage-type character that wears cloth and is just kind of a spell slinger. I wonder how that's going to work, or if it's going to be more of a hybrid kind of warrior mage type deal. Interesting stuff to think about. But I really wanted to show Expert, not because it's more impressive in terms of difficulty, but I definitely think it's more impressive in terms of the variety of enemies you face, how they look, the armor sets, and weapon variety in Expert Arena is fan-fucking-tastic as far as I'm concerned. Whereas in Novice Arena, it's a little underwhelming. Even once you get to the end, the opponents are really nothing to write home about. The armor sets look okay, but in Expert Arena, it's on a whole different level, in my opinion. It really sort of unlocks the potential that this game has in my mind. Speaking of looking fancy, this opponent looks fantastic to me, and his weapon is absolutely a beast. That's probably one of the easiest fights I've had with this guy, even though I think he hit me like one time and it almost brought me to half health. That mace absolutely smashes through defenses. It's ridiculous. Now, it does make sense that a blunt weapon would be much more formidable against a plate wearer than a bladed weapon. So from that aspect, it definitely makes sense. But that little one-handed mace, it's every bit as deadly as any weapon I've used in the game. You know, even the two-handed, heavy weapons that can basically take an opponent out in one swing. Now, I definitely wanted to pick up this guy's weapon because I knew that my next few opponents were going to be heavily armored. Plus, I wanted to show off a little bit of the one-handed combat with a shield, which I'm not very good at. I am much more adept at using a two-handed weapon. But this guy right here, I'm pretty sure he's using a pick hammer or something like that. It's absolutely devastating. So if you're trading blows with this guy, wielding something like a two-handed axe, it's not going to end well for you because he's wearing a full set of plate armor and he has a weapon that's very well made to devastate plate armor. But as you can see, I just completely knocked that guy around with this one-handed mace, just completely crushing through his defenses. And I'm going to snatch up his plate armor afterwards. Looks pretty awesome. I had some kind of like some spalders attached there, and as you may have noticed, putting on the breastplate unequipped my spalders and my breastplate simultaneously. But the defenses that this plate armor gives you is insane compared to non-plate armor. Now that being said, I would really like to see more light armor in this game as being a viable alternative to plate. Maybe that's something that they have in mind in the future, or maybe plate armor is going to be indicative of you being a badass. But like I said, they do plan on adding magic and whatnot, so I would anticipate that there's probably going to be a greater variety available for you. Oh, this opponent, this halberd, absolutely is my favorite weapon in the game. Anytime I'm able to get by this opponent, I pick up the halberd just so I can get some practice in with it. It is one satisfying weapon, and I'm pretty sure the force of that overhead was enough just to knock my opponent on their ass there. But yeah, this one-handed mace is just so disgusting versus plate. They're already down. Yeah, pretty disgusting. But I'm going to go ahead and mix things up and use the halberd. And I believe this is the final fight that I'm approaching. Now, the thing with halberds is that they're a bladed weapon, obviously. So when you're going up against someone wearing a full suit of plate armor, it's not going to be as effective as a mace or a blunt weapon. So that is something to consider when using a weapon like this. But another thing about the halberd is, because it's a polearm type weapon, you really want to keep a certain distance from your opponent, and being crowded is absolutely a terrible thing with this weapon, because the only thing that's going to happen is, assuming you're trying to fight back while being crowded, is you're going to be hitting your opponent with the hilt of the weapon. So timing and spacing is even more imperative using a weapon like this. But at the same time, when you're able to land a flush hit with this thing, it's so satisfying and devastating, even against a plate user. But this guy, this final opponent, is so heavily armored. You know, it took me quite a few hits to chip this guy out. And trading blows with this weapon that he's got, which I don't know what that is, frankly. It's unfortunate because you cannot loot the final opponent in the arena. First of all, I'd love to snatch up his plate armor. But second of all, I'd like to know what weapon he's got. It is absolutely devastating. So I'm trying my best not to trade hits with that, and I'm trying to fake him out as best as I can and sneak in a hit when I can. But I think I've covered pretty much everything I wanted to discuss. I hope you guys enjoyed the fights. Hope you enjoyed the demonstration of Exanima Expert Arena. Be well, and I'll see you on the next one.